Corporate Finance Excel Practice Problem. In this presentation, we will work a practice problem in Excel related to the creation of a balance sheet. We'll have a few different formats of the balance sheet that we will be creating. Get ready, because it's time to take a stance with corporate finance. Here we are in Excel. We have our information on the left-hand side. We're going to put that into the blue area on our right-hand side. What we have on the left-hand side is basically a scrambling of the accounts for balance sheet type of accounts that we're going to put into a typical type of order for the balance sheet. So when we think about the balance sheet, remember we're thinking overall overarching the accounting equation. Assets equal liabilities plus equity on the balance sheet. And then we're going to think of within those sections, we have subcategories such as current and long-term for the assets and liabilities, and then the actual accounts that we're going to have to categorize within those categories. Also note, there's a couple different ways you might see the balance sheet being format. One, side-by-side kind of format. We could have different kind of columns that we'll be setting up in terms of how many columns we're going to have in the balance sheet. So it's a little bit more different kind of formats. You could also see it in a format with just, one a vertical type of format on the balance sheet. So we'll format this a couple different ways. We'll take a little bit more time when we do the first balance sheet that we will do, and then we'll kind of reformat those same numbers in a couple different formats to get an idea of what it might look like. That can help us out with the formatting in Excel as we go. So let's start off here. We're going to have the balance sheet. Whenever you think of the balance sheet, assets, liabilities, equity, then we're going to start with the assets then. Within assets, we'll typically start off with current assets. So we're going to have assets, and then we're going to have current assets. So we'll start off with assets. So I'm going to say assets, and then we're going to have a subcategory within those, the main category, which is going to be current assets. Now, oftentimes we'll see a colon to represent that we're going to have a subcategory. And the assets, you might see in assets, the assets have a subcategory, the whole thing. Or you might see it just basically, you could center the assets possibly. You might see this in a few different ways. Let's center it just to practice the centering process on the assets. I'm going to highlight, we're going to be putting the assets all the way across this area. So I'm going to highlight or select it. Then I'm going to right click on it. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. What I recommend not doing is going into the home tab up top and go into the merge and center. That's probably the first way you would think to do it. But then you got these cells that have merged together. So I'd rather just center it across that selection. So I'm going to undo that. Home tab, alignment, I undid the merge and center. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to go to the format cells. And then I'm going to center the cells. I'm going to go to alignment. And I want to go to the horizontal, and I'm going to center it across the selection. So center across the selection. And that way I don't have to basically merge any cells into one cell, and it'll still center across. But this cell is still there, right? It's not like gone away. So that's another way you might see it. Then in the current assets, we're going to pick everything up that's a current asset. We're going to typically, this will be most of the assets typically. We're going to start off with the cash. I'm going to say we'll pick up the cash. Now there's two columns here. This doesn't represent debits and credits. We're going to avoid debits and credits for the most part, because in finance, oftentimes they're not dealing with debits and credits as much as with the format of the balance sheet. If you want to look at debits and credits, we have accounting classes that focus on the building blocks, which are debits and credits more. And the balance sheet itself will be similar. So will be the same, the end result will be the same, but creation of it will be not from the debits and credits. Okay, so we're going to go pick up the 14,000. Then we're going to go to the next item. I'm going to find a home for it. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to say right click on it. Let's make it yellow to say that we have found a home for that particular item. The next item we'll typically have is usually accounts receivable will follow the cash. It'll be the second most liquid item. So I'm going to be picking up the accounts receivable. And now the accounts receivable's got an allowance to it. So what we'll do with the accounts receivable oftentimes is put the accounts receivable on the books. That represents people owing us money. And then we will put on the books what we think was uncollectible. We're going to estimate how much is uncollectible. Larger companies will typically do that, estimate how much is uncollectible. If you're a small company, you might wait till you believe it is uncollectible. At the point in time it's uncollectible, you will write it off. But large companies will typically say, okay, I got a receivable of the 52,000, let's say, and of that 52, I'm right clicking on this, making it yellow. We believe that there's going to be part of it that will be uncollectible that we're going to represent here as allowance for bad debt. This is why I'm pulling it into the enter column here, because I'm going to basically net these two out to give us the net receivable. So of the $52,000 that clients owe us, we believe that $13,000 is not going to be collectible. I'm going to highlight these items. I'm going to right click and yellow it. And therefore the net accounts receivable, which I'm just going to call net accounts receivable, typing it in there. And that's going to be equal to the 52 minus the 13. 52 minus the 13. Now this net is probably over here for you now. And we could start to format this as we go. So when it says colon, we have a colon here that represents everything underneath it will be a subcategory. We will further represent this subcategory by selecting these items, go into the Home tab, Alignment, and I'm going to increase the indenting. So that takes it in a little bit without having to make another column or without having to use like a space bar to indent it. So it's a nice feature to have. So then I'm going to put an underline under this 13,000 because we did a formula underneath it. So I'm going to go to the Home tab, Font, put an underline under that item. Then we're going to go to the next one, which is going to be marketable securities. So I'm going to say marketable securities is down here. And that's usually, marketable securities are basically us investing in securities. They're not our securities, right? So we're investing in something. So that's going to be an asset. We're going to say it's a short-term or current asset. In this case, 26,000, and that should go in the outer column. 26,000. The only reason we have this inner column is for any kind of sub-calculation within this section. So then we're going to be picking up and we can indent that. I'm going to go to the Home tab, Alignment, and indent it. So next we have the inventory. Looks like we can pick that up. Inventory is going to be an asset. I'm going to indent that. Home tab, Alignment, indent. We'll put that into this column again, and that's going to be the inventory. It's going to be an asset that we're going to sell in the future. I'm going to select this item again, right click, and make it yellow. So that looks like total all the current assets, right? So we got bonds payable, plants and equipment's an asset, but it's going to be long-term or fixed asset or depreciable asset, property, plants, and equipment. And then the investments down here, we're going to say these are investments that are long-term, which I probably should have noted in the notes here, but this is going to be a long-term investment. So let's go ahead and sum this up. I'm going to say this is going to be total current assets then. Total current assets. And then I'm going to indent this 2 times. So I'm going to go to the Home tab, Alignment, indent twice. So now it's colon, indented to show that it's a subcategory, double indent to see the subcategory. Then I'm going to sum up the outer column. I'm going to use the sum function. You want to get really used to the sum function, equals the sum of, I'm hitting the up arrow once, then holding down shift and the up arrow to get up to that number 14,000. And then you could close it up, but you don't really have to close up this formula because it'll do it for you automatically if you do not. So, and notice you can also highlight this column or select it, and then see down here to double check your numbers really quickly. 146,000 is the sum of that column. We can then underline this. I'm going to go to the 67,000, Home tab, Font group, and underline it. And there we have that. Then we're going to go to the other assets. And we're going to pick up the only other asset, which we're going to say is not a current asset, which is going to be this investment. So we're going to say that's not a current asset, and therefore in other assets, I'm going to indent that. There's usually not a whole lot going on in other assets. There will be things going on oftentimes in fixed assets or property, plants, and equipment. So I'm going to go to the Home tab, Alignment, and indent that. I'm going to put it in the outer column. I'm not going to have another subcategory because there's only one item in it. Therefore, I'm not going to say total other assets down here because there's only that one thing. So so instead of having two lines, I'm just going to simply say, hey, look, this is the other assets. There it is. Since there's only one of them, I will just put it directly into the outer column. And we're going to say that's going to be the investment. Well, let's yellow that off. We're going to yellow that off. So it's been yellowed off. And then we're going to go to the fixed assets. So next we're going to have a subcategory, which we will call fixed assets. You might see it called property, plants, and equipment. You might see it called depreciable assets. You might see it called term assets, or PP&E for property, plant, and equipment. Once again, that's going to be the category. Then we're going to have the items or the accounts within that category. And the items within that category, the things that are like depreciable assets and land, typically. In this case, we're going to have property, plant, and equipment, or just simply plant and equipment. I'm going to pull that into the enter column again because we're going to have two things related to this, that being the depreciable account and the accumulated depreciation related to it. Now here we're just going to have one category. Note that you could have multiple different categories as well as plant and equipment, and then you might have automobiles or something like that that are another depreciable asset, buildings, another depreciable asset, and you can then think about, you could have three different, pairs of accounts to represent the value and the book value of them as we go. So it'll look like this. We'll have the property, plants, and equipment. We're going to put that into the enter column. Then we're going to have the related accumulated depreciation. We'll talk more about accumulated depreciation later, but just to give you a general idea, we're saying here that we purchased the property, plants, and equipment, and this could account for multiple different things, multiple different property, plants, and equipment of $188,000. That's the cost. But then we allocate that cost over the time period that we're going to use, and it's an estimate. Now, because it's an estimate, we don't write down the property, plants, and equipment as we consume it and use it, but rather make another account called accumulated depreciation to estimate that decrease. And that tells our reader, hey, look, this is what we purchased it for. That's the cost of it. And this is what we believe that it went down by. And we have already recognized the expense related to that purchase of the $377,000. In other words, that $377,000 has hit the income statement at some time in the form of depreciation expense. Now we're going to select these two. I'm going to select these two. I'm going to go to the Home tab, Font. We're going to indent that. And then we're going to have the net fixed assets, or you could just call it fixed assets total. Let's say total to keep consistent. Total fixed assets. And then I'm going to indent that twice. Home tab, alignment, indent, indent. Then I'm going to do a subtraction problem here, which will be equal to, we're going to take that 844 minus the 377. Then I'm going to put an underline under the 377, Home tab, Font, and then underline. Then we're going to have the total assets on the bottom line, which will be total assets. And we'll then sum this up equals the sum of, I'm holding down Shift and going up to the 146 now. And then you could close it up, but you don't need to. I'm just going to hit Enter. And so there's the sum function. Then I'm going to underline under the 467 by going to the Home tab, Font, Underline. We'll put a double underline under the 635 by going to the Home tab, Font, Drop Down. Now we want the double underline. Now we're going to go to the other side, which is going to be here, and we expect this number at the end of the day, which will be liabilities and equity, to be equal to that 635 as well. That's how we know we're in balance. So this is going to be the liabilities. So I'm going to say, all right, this is the liabilities. Once again, you could represent this by just having the liabilities, or you could center them as we did before. So I'm going to select these two cells to match what we did with the assets here. Right click on it. We're going to go to the Format Cells, Alignment Group, and then I'm going to go to the horizontal, and I'm going to center across the selection, and there we have that. Then we're going to go to the current liabilities. So current liabilities, these are those that are going to be due within a year. Notice we have the colon to represent that everything under here is going to be a subcategory of the current liabilities. We're looking for accounts payable is where we start. AP, accounts payable. I'm just going to put them all into the one column here for the accounts payable. There we have it. I'm going to indent this now. Go into the Home tab, Alignment, increase the indenting. Then we've got the notes payable. So this is going to be equal to the notes payable. Let's just call it notes payable. The reason I'm putting notes payable here is because they're notes that it says are due within a year. So they're due within less than a year. That makes them current. If they were not due until over a year, they would be long-term. And it could be the case where the note has a current portion and a long-term portion, just as the notes that we're most familiar with would typically have, like a car payment, which may extend past a year, but you pay part of the principal and interest with each payment. So this will then be equal to, we're going to pick up that $41,000. Let's go ahead and indent this. I'm going to go to the Home tab, Alignment, increase the indenting, and then I'm going to make this one yellow, selecting it, right-clicking on it, yellowing it. Make this one yellow, selecting it, right-clicking on it, and yellowing it. That's going to give us our total liabilities, so our total current liabilities, I should say. So total current liabilities, I'm going to indent that 2 times now because we're ending the subcategory. Home tab, the alignment 2 times. Then I'm going to sum this up, equals the SUM, shift 9, up once, holding down shift, up again, and enter. And then I'm going to put an underline under the 41,000, Home tab, font group, drop down, underline. All right, now we got the long-term liabilities. So we're going to say the long-term liabilities will be here. We only have one of them. Once again, there's usually less long-term liabilities, although there's often something in there, which could be a note payable or a bond payable, something that's going to be due past a year's time period. But typically, there will be more current liabilities than long-term liabilities. I'm going to go Home tab, Alignment, increase the indenting. I'm going to put this over here. We're going to say this is going to be equal to the 216. And we're just going to leave it there. We're not going to then have another category saying long-term liabilities or total long-term liabilities because there's only one line item. It would be repetitive to do that. Therefore, we're just going to say, hey, long-term liabilities has only that one thing in the category. That's the total. I'm not going to put a total right underneath it because it would be redundant to do so. So then we will then have the total liabilities that we will have. And that's going to be the current and the long-term liabilities. So I'm going to use the sum function equals the sum of these items. We'll underline here, go into the Home tab, font, underline. And then we're going to go to the equity, the stockholders' equity. So stockholders' equity. And I'll represent this the same way and put this in the middle. So I'm going to highlight this, right-click, and then let's center this across. So I'm going to go to the Format Cells. What happened here? We're going to select this. We're going to right-click on it. Then we're going to format the cells. There it is. Format, alignment, horizontal. We want to center across the selection. So there we have that. Then we're going to be picking up the stockholders' equity. This represents the owner's, claim. And that's going to be equal to the preferred stock. So the preferred stock on the books at the 56,000 equals the 56,000. Now the preferred stock is preferred and they typically get paid first, but they don't have the voting power. You'll recall the common stockholders, I'm going to right click on this and highlight it, are the common stockholders are typically the ones that have ownership because they have voting rights. And then this will be equal to the 100,000. Notice what this par value is saying here. There's a 100,000 shares. They're all at $1 par. So 100,000 share times $1 is going to be 100,000. So anything that was issued, any shares that were issued over the $1 per share is going to then go to the capital paid in excess of par or additional paid in capital, which is going to be the 95,000 in this case. In other words, when we issue the stock, we're going to set a par value, which will be fixed, and that will allow us to have some standardization with this number. When we sell the stocks, we will not sell them for the par value. We will sell them for whatever value we can, and so which will typically be over the par value. So that means any excess will be this 95,000. Therefore, the sum of these two is basically what the investment, the initial investment was from the owners to the company for a normal kind of share of the stock. So that's the initial investment that we have there. So you could think of those two accounts kind of like one account that we split up in an arbitrary way, making a par value with an arbitrary par value for reasons that it helps us to standardize basically this number, the number of shares that are out there for it. Okay, and then we're going to have the retained earnings. Retained earnings, I have been lax in highlighting some of these so that we found a home for this. We found a home for this a long time ago. We found a home for this now because that's going to be the 87,000 here. And we found a home for this one. So that one has a home, which is nice. Okay, so that's, and the retained earnings represents the income that has accumulated. So notice what we have here. This is the investment for the preferred stock, the investment for the common stock. This is the value of the company that the owners have claim to because the owners put that money in. That represents their initial investment. So part of and then this retained earnings represents the earnings that have been accumulating over time, meaning revenue minus expenses has been happening. Net income then rolls into the retained earnings on the balance sheet. So this retained earnings represents earnings that have been retained and have not yet been given back out to the company in the form of dividends. In other words, any earnings that the company has, they can either hold on to them or they can give them to the stockholders, owners of the company, in the form of dividends. These represent, the $87,000 represent earnings that have not been distributed out, given back out in the form of dividends, but are being held on to by the company. Okay, so that's going to give us our total stockholders' equity. Total stockholders' equity, I'll sum this up, equals the sum of these items. Let's put an underline here, home tab, font, underline. And then we're going to come to the bottom line, which I'm going to skip a line because I want to have it even with this bottom line here. Because this is going to be the double underline number, which will be equal to the 279 plus the 338. And there's the 635, which I can put an underline under, home tab, font, drop down, double underline. All right. So these two are now in balance. So there we have that. We've got the total assets here that are broken out. We couldn't, so this is the value of the total assets as of a point in time, whereas the income statement has a beginning and an end as of that point in time, and it's broken out valuing the assets that we have. We can't give that value to the owners unless we were to sell the stock, because we only have 14,000, sell the company, because we only have 14,000 in cash. But the value of the assets is worth 635. Who has claim to those assets? Third parties have claim to 297,000 of it, and then the owner has claim to 338,000 of it to come up to that same 635,000. Of the 338,000 that the owners have claim to, this amount, which is 251,000, was invested by the owners into the company, and the 87,000 represents earnings that the company have been making that have not yet been given out to the owners in the form of dividends. All right, now let's look at another format of the balance sheet. This will be the same, except now we're going to have 3 columns over here on the balance sheet, and we'll just have one more subcategory just to extend this, and this is just another kind of look and feel to the balance sheet that some people might like. So I'm going to make this a little bit faster. We're just going to use the same numbers. I'm going to work on formatting now. We're just going to keep formatting it a little bit differently, but it's all the same thing that we're doing. So I'm going to say this is equal to the assets. This time I'm going to keep the assets just on the left-hand side. I won't center them across. And, or you might actually put assets and a colon to represent that there's going to be a subcategory. Then we'll pick up the current assets. Then I'm going to pick up the cash in the same format. So we've got the cash. But this time I'm going to put the cash in the middle of 3 columns here, and we'll just have one more kind of subcategory column. So I'm going to say this is going to be equal to the cash. So there's the cash, and then we'll pick up the accounts receivable. Accounts receivable. Now this one I'm going to pick up into the inner column again, just kind of like we did here. So I'll put that on the inner column, equal to the 552,000. Then we've got the allowance for bad debt, which is going to be equal to the 13. And then that's going to give us the net accounts receivable, which I'll break out into the column next to it like we did before, equals the sum of, and then these 2 items. Note that this should be a subtraction problem, the 52,000 minus the 13, so it should be equal to this number minus the 13. So there's an error there. We will pick up the error later, so it'll be wrong here until we get to the bottom line, and then I'll see that it's off, and we'll pick up the error like typically will happen oftentimes when there's a data input error. A lot of times when you pick up the data input error, when will it be picked up? When something's out of balance and you go back in and kind of double check things. And then I'm going to underline this, go into the Home tab, Font Group, drop down, underlining the 13,000. Then we're going to be picking up the marketable securities. I'm going to put that in the same column, equals the marketable security. Then the inventory that we have that we're going to resell, that represents what we're holding on to in terms of things we sell. Then I'm going to put the total in the outer column. So I'm going to put this in the outer column. This is the change that we have. So now we're going to have one other column. Total in the outer column is going to be the total of this column. So notice every time we total something up, we're totaling one column at a time. It's if there's something right to the left of it, above and to the left, we're totaling what's into the above and to the left, right? If there's something right above it, we're going to total what's above it. Notice what we're not doing. I'm not jumping from this column back to this column. In other words, I'm not going to touch anything a whole column away when making a total, typically in a balance sheet. So if you kind of get used to that idea, these sheets will look less overwhelming when you look at them. So then I'm going to go to the Home tab, Font. I'm going to underline here. We're going to do the liabilities now. We're going to do, well, let's do some indenting. I'm going to highlight these or select them. Home tab and alignment, indent. Then I'm going to indent this one another time. Home tab, alignment, indent again. And now let's go to the next one, which is the other assets. And that's going to be investments. And this one I'm going to take directly all the way out to the outer column because we're not going to have that total again because this is the only thing in it. So I'm going to pick up that 22,000. I'm going to indent this, Home tab, alignment, indenting. And then we're going to go to the fixed assets. So I'm just going to say this is going to be the fixed assets. We're going to pick up the plant and the equipment. We're going to pull that into the inner column once again, but it's going to be not fully inner column, but into this column here, subcategory column. To the 844, then we're going to have the accumulated depreciation. That's the number. We want the name. And that's going to be for the 377. That'll give us the total fixed assets in the outer column. Then subtracting this out, this will be the 844 minus the 377 for the 467. I'm going to underline these 377 now by going to the Home tab, the font, and then underline. Then we'll indent these. I'm going to select these three items, Home tab, alignment, indent. Then we'll indent the total fixed assets again, Home tab, alignment, indent again. Then I'm going to say the total assets then. Total assets are going to be, now I'm just going to sum up the outer column where we have just the totals that we need to add up in the outer column. Once again, there's something above it. Therefore, I'm just going to add up this column. I'm not going to jump from this column to another column. I'm typically not going to add things up or do anything from multiple different columns, right? It's always going to be, we're going to be picking up the numbers from generally just one column. So this time being the ones right above it equals the sum of the items right above it, these three numbers. Then we're going to go ahead and underline this, Home tab, font, underline. We're going to double underline here, Home tab, font, drop down, double underline. All right. So there we have it. And it looks, there's something that's a little bit different here. So there's an error somewhere along the way, 14. And that's because I added these two instead of subtracting them. So I'm going to say this equals the 52 minus the 13. Now those errors that you will find will typically wash themselves out. You'll pick them up because you'll have the double entry accounting system to do so. You'll be in balance or you won't be in balance. That's how you pick it up. All right, now we're going to do the liabilities. So I'm going to do the same thing on the liability side here. This is going to be equal to the current liabilities. Top line is going to be liabilities, colon. And then I'm just going to pick up these same numbers. I'm going to go a little bit faster since we're running kind of long on this one. This is going to be in the outer column. Actually, I'm going to bring this into the inner column here. This is going to be equal to the 40,000. Then we'll pick up the notes payable. That's going to be equal to the 41,000. And then I'm going to indent these to show that it's a subcategory, home tab, alignment, indent. Then I'm going to pull this out to the outer category, which is going to be the total current liabilities. Let's indent that 2 times. Home tab, alignment, indent, indent. Pull that out to the outer category, which is going to be equals the sum of the 40,000 and the 41. Let's underline the 41,000. Home tab, font, drop down, underline. Then we'll pick up the long-term liabilities, where we only have the bonds payable. Let's indent that. Home tab, alignment, indent. We'll bring this into the outer column because there's only one of them. Then we'll pick up the total liabilities, which is going to be the sum of the outer column now equals the sum of the 2 numbers in the outer column. And so there we have that. Let's underline this one, home tab, font, underline. Then we're going to have the equity. So we're going to call this Stockholders Equity, colon. And this is going to be equal to the preferred stock, which I'm going to put in the enter column. Now, also note that, see how this runs over really long? You could have 2 lines there. There's a couple different ways you can kind of deal with that. If you just type over the cell here, as we've seen before, it'll kind of write over the text. To see all the text, you can make this cell longer. You can wrap the text by going home tab and wrap. So it looks like that, but it makes the cell kind of wide everywhere else on the sheet. So I avoid that if I can. The other way you could do that to format this is you can take part of this line and put it on the second line. So I won't do that now, but we'll see that a little bit later. But for right now, I'm just going to write over it so we won't see all the text. So you're going to say this will be equal to the 56,000. And then to see, if you want to see the text like here, or you'd have to go where originally is, you could see the text. But let's do it this way. Just to show you, we can copy this if I was to just paste it here. Copy and paste it as 1, 2, 3. So now you could see the text here. The other way you could deal with it is you could double click on it and cut part of it and put it underneath and then pull the number down below. Okay, but we're just going to write over it right now. And then I'm going to say that this is going to be equal to the common stock. We'll bring that into the inside. The 100. We've got the capital. That's going to be the 95. We've got the retained earnings. That's going to be the 87. Then we've got the total stockholders equity. We'll pull that into the outer column this time, equals the sum of, picking up the 87 to the 56, the 338. Let's underline the 87 now. Home tab, font, underline. Then we're going to go to the total liabilities and stockholders equity, summing up the outer column equals the sum of the 338 and the 297, giving us the 635, which matches the assets, so we are in balance again. Let's double underline it. Home tab, font, drop down, double underline. All right, I'm going to do this one more time in a vertical fashion, which is the other really common way you'll see this. It's kind of easier to format this way in some ways because the side-by-side things means you have to line up these 2 columns nicely. It's nice to see these 2 lined up, but it takes a little bit more, you might have some space here to do that and whatnot. It might be easier to do just in 1 column. So let's do that now. I'll do this quickly here. So we're going to say we'll pick up the assets, and then we're going to pick up the current assets. Now I'm going to copy this down. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to say shift. I'm just going to highlight some of these cells down to, let's say, here, and then paste. I'm pasting the formula. Notice it pastes the whole thing, and it just picks up what we want to pick up. The other, right? And then I can select these items. We can go to the Home tab, font. We can indent. I'm going to do the same thing here now. So I'm going to put this into the outer column. I'm going to go back, converting back to the similar format we had for the first balance sheet we did in terms of the number of columns. So we're going to pick the 14,000. I'll put this into the inner column. This is going to be the 52,000. This is going to be the 13,000. We'll pull this into the outer column, which will be equal to the 52,000 minus the 13,000. Let's put an underline under the 13,000. Home tab, font group, drop down, underline. This one we're going to be picking up then the 26,000 inventory, the 67,000. Let's sum up then the outer column equals the sum of up once, holding down shift, scrolling up to 14,000 and enter. Let's put an underline under the 67, home tab, font group, underline. Let's indent the total current assets again. Home tab, alignment, indent. Then we'll pick up the total assets, which is other assets, which will include inventory. I'm going to indent that. Home tab, alignment, indent. Putting that in the outer column because there's only one of them. Then picking up the fixed assets as a category, including plant and equipment and the related accumulated depreciation, cost, and the decrease in cost that we have estimated it to be. Home tab, alignment, indenting those, pulling that into the inner column so we can do that sub-calculation for the 844, the 377, subtracting them in the outer column. That's going to be the 844 minus the 377. That's going to give us the total fixed assets, which I'm going to indent 2 times. Home tab, alignment, indent, and indent. Then we'll pick up the total assets. That's going to be equal to the sum of the 467 up to the 146. Underlining the 467, home tab, font, and underline. Then we'll double underline here. Home tab, font, drop down, and double underline. Okay, so then we're going to go to the liabilities. So we'll pick up the liabilities and the equity. So liabilities will be next. So I'm going to say liabilities, current liabilities, which is going to be equal to the accounts payable. I'm going to copy that and put it down one so it's the same item. Let's go ahead and indent this. Home tab, alignment, indent. We'll pull these will be in the outer column. So we're going to pick up the 40,000. I'm going to copy that, or we can autofill it down. Copy and paste it is the same. We'll do the same thing. There it is to the 41. Underline here. Home tab, font, underline. This will then be the total current liabilities, which will bring out to the outer column equals the sum of the 40 and the 41. We'll indent this 2 times. Home tab, alignment, indent, indent. Now we're at the long-term liabilities and the bonds payable. Bonds payable. Indenting that. Home tab, alignment, indent. Bringing that to the outer column because there's only one thing in there, the 216,000. That then giving us the total liabilities. Total liabilities in the outer column equals the sum of the 216 and the 81 for the 297. Then we have the stockholders equity. Stockholders equity, I'm going to be picking up this item. I'm going to autofill that down because it'll pick up the relative cells if I autofill it down. And then we'll bring this into the inner column equals the 56,000. Let's autofill that down, or you can copy, holding down shift, down, down, and paste, Control V. So there's that. We can underline here, home tab, font, underline. Then we're going to have the total stockholders equity. Total stockholders equity. We might indent this. We might go indent. And total stockholders equity equals the sum of these items. And then we're going to have the total stockholders equity. And then we can put here, either here or at the bottom, total liabilities and stockholders equity equals the sum of this number and this number. And there's that. We have the underline here, home tab, font, underline, double underline here, home tab font, and double underline. So it's a little bit harder to see the total assets equaling the total liabilities in equity, but you can see it's a little bit easier to format in that you don't have this kind of like double column thing. You don't have to line up, in other words, to how long this is to how long this is, so it lines up for these totals to be lined up in that way. So those are common ways to do that. I know I did that quite quickly, but you could practice formatting them in different ways. Just practice entering this into Excel over and over. You can practice copying and pasting this items just to practice the Excel as you just move the numbers around into different formats and move the formatting of the worksheet around.